Father, you're the only power that can save this world today. Jesus, you're the only power that can save this world today. Spirit, you're the only power that can save this world today.
I'm really glad that we're able to worship together this morning. We've worked really hard to put together a worship service that's a little shorter this morning so that we can more easily remind each other and stay focused on what is true. Let's do that together now. Let's read aloud God's word, and let's remind each other what is true. In times of uncertainty, where do we turn? And let's say this aloud together, even at home. We look to Yahweh, the maker of heaven and earth. His plans stand firm forever.
In times of turmoil and fear, what do? We remember that God is our refuge and strength, and He is present with us. Therefore, we will not fear.
In times of violence and anger, how do we respond? We hope in Yahweh, who is our stronghold. He promises a future for those who seek peace.
In times of injustice, who can we trust? We know that Yahweh upholds the cause of the oppressed. He secures justice and upholds the cause of the needy. And so we ask, how long, O Lord? How long shall we cry for help?
But now, this is what Yahweh says. He who created you, He who formed you, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. Creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. Oh, and as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath. every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so so alive. The stars were made to worship, so alive. If the mountains bow in reverence, so alive. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. If everything exists to lift you high, so alive. If the wind goes where you send it, so alive. If the rocks cry out in silence, so alive. If the sun of all our praise still falls shine, we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, you redeemed my heart from all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so alive. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so alive. I can see your heart 8 billion different ways. Every precious one, a child he died to save. You gave your life to love him, so alive. I will build my house with a storm or drought on the rock that does not move. I will set my home in your love, oh Lord, and your faithfulness will prove. You are steadfast, steadfast. By the word you spoke, all the starry hosts are called out by name each night. In your watchful care, I will rest secure as you lead us with your light. You are steadfast, steadfast. You are steadfast, steadfast. I will not trust in the strength of kings. On your promise I will stand. I will shout for joy. I will raise my voice. Hallelujah to the Lamb. You are steadfast, steadfast. God. You are steadfast, steadfast. You are steadfast, steadfast.
Son of man, reach out your hand and touch my weary heart. Son of man, reach out your hand and heal my tired soul. It's you that I need. It's you that I need. Son of man, reach out your hand and fill my heart with faith. Son of man, reach out your hand and fill my heart with hope. It's you that I need. It's you that I need. Jesus, that we need. It's you that we need.
That Jesus is all you need is the journey that every wanting, willing disciple has to make. The more we believe that Jesus is what we need, the more we believe we have enough. But the less we believe Jesus is what we need, we'll never have enough. And so we come to Jesus as the bread of life whenever we give, because giving is always an act of worship. It's an act of discipleship. It's an act of believing that Jesus is what we need, and therefore what he has given us is enough. And so we give as an act of faith and worship, because that's what he's commanded us to do. If you want to give today, the number at the bottom of your screen is a way that you can just text any number, and that will give as part of worship today. While you do that, let's watch a short video, and then I'm going to come back and talk about a story in Genesis 28 that I think is really interesting. It's a good question. I mean, what do you have left when all you have left are promises? Everything else you thought you had in one way or another eluded your grasp or proved to be empty, and you're stuck with nothing but a promise. That's the situation Jacob ran into in Genesis 28. Jacob grew up in an incredibly wealthy family. 2 generations of wealth that got wealthier with every generation. In his day, we're given the description in Genesis of all kinds of livestock, of silver and gold and servants. And this is the family, this is the environment Jacob grew up in, and he was set for life in his mind, but his greed and his deception got the best of him. So he conspired with his mother Rebekah to deceive and manipulate his father Isaac in his dying breath to give Jacob a verbal blessing. That was a big deal in Jacob's culture, Jacob's day, a verbal blessing that was meant by Isaac to give to Esau, Jacob's brother. And so when it happened, Esau became incensed and wanted to kill Jacob. And Isaac and Rebekah didn't want their son to kill their other son, and so they kicked Jacob out of the house and told him to take a 520-mile journey east to Rebekah's family. And Jacob, after having so much and so much promise, was left with nothing. And we pick up the story in verse 10. It says that Jacob left Beersheba. I always thought that'd be a great name for a Jewish bar, or a Christian bar for that matter. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Now here's what's happening. Jacob has nothing, not even a pillow. So he literally just traveling decides to stop, sleep on the ground, and grabs a stone for a pillow. And he has a vision. You might have a vision too if you slept on a stone for a pillow. The next verse says, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And this is a weird phrase. Remember it though, we'll come back to it. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. This is a bridge between heaven and earth. This is a link between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. And the next verse says that there above it stood Yahweh. That's all capital Lord. There above it stood the Lord. Now that is translated from the ancient Hebrew. It could just as easily be translated, there beside him stood the Lord, as he lay on the ground and the Lord looked down from above. There beside him stood the Lord, and he said, I am, and now he's saying the exact same covenant promise he had said to his father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham. Now he's saying it to Jacob for the first time. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Now the land, like Keith said in his sermon last week, which if you didn't listen to it, please download it and listen to it. It's a phenomenal sermon, important sermon for this series. And as he said there, I'll say it again because it's right here in this promise. The idea of the land in this covenant promise is because God's salvation is not to take us from the earth to heaven when we die, as if escaping this world is salvation. God's salvation has always been, well, what Jesus described in Matthew 19:28 as the renewal of the world when he returns. The renewal of the world spiritually and physically. That this world, healing this broken world, has always been part of God's plan and always been his covenant promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And so he goes on to say that verse 14, your descendants will be like the dust. And this is language we've heard before. I'm repeating it now, and I think probably the fourth sermon because it's being repeated all the way through the book of Genesis. It's important. This is the covenant promise. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. And like we've said before, the idea of Abraham and Jacob and Isaac's offspring is both plural in the descendant sense, but also singular in that there'll be an offspring through whom all peoples on earth, all nations on earth will be blessed. This is one of those passages that is talking about God's plan for a renewed earth, but also a renewed people, a new people, that through whom this one offspring, this ultimate offspring, all peoples on earth will be blessed. A new humanity will be created through a resurrection, and it's already started because Jesus has already risen from the dead. It's already in play. A new creation has already begun. And so the descendants of Jacob are those who, through whom this ultimate offspring, Jesus, become a new people on a renewed earth, and even now work toward its healing. That's part of the gospel. That's part of what God's promise is and our mission. So like so many stories in Genesis, this vision that God gives to Jacob of this stairway and the angels of God ascending and descending on it is part of this story. It's part of this covenant promise. It's what God's promise to Jacob points to, and it's interesting because Jesus then picks up on it and makes an amazing claim about himself in John chapter 1, verse 45. The story begins with one of Jesus' disciples named Philip. It says, Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law. That's what we're looking at now in Genesis, written by Moses, and about whom the prophets also spoke. So here's a friend that comes up to you and he says, we've found the one that the entire Bible's been about, from Genesis on, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Now, what would you do if you had a trusted friend who was convinced and he says this to you? Well, here's what Nathanael does. Nathanael says, Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked, and come and see, said Philip. See, what Nathanael is doing is somehow through his cultural bigotry, somehow through maybe even an ethnic superiority as a Jew, he's actually getting ready to dismiss Jesus. His own bigotry, the way he saw, you can't trust people from Nazareth. Why would I trust anybody from Nazareth? And he won't be the last disciple to have to work through his own issues of cultural bigotry and ethnic superiority as they grow in their discipleship with Jesus. But we know how stupid Nathanael sounds because in his own sense of ethnic superiority and cultural bigotry toward anybody from Nazareth, he's about ready to dismiss Jesus. Here's the thing. He actually thinks he's superior to Jesus. Watch how Jesus deals with it. John, the verse 47. When Jesus saw Nathanael, so Philip's bringing him, when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, now here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Now here, when I read this, I think Jesus is being sarcastic because I think he's hitting right on the target, this idea of Nathanael's sense of ethnic superiority. And he said, yeah, you truly are an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. By the way, don't forget what an Israelite is. An Israelite is a Jacobite. Jacob's name will be changed to Israel. Jacob is Israel. An Israelite is a descendant of Jacob. He's a Jacobite. And Jacob, well, Jacob was a deceiver. That's why he's in the mess he's in right now. Don't forget your ancestry, Jesus is saying to Nathanael, and he's hitting it head on. But then Jesus says next, well, actually Nathanael says next, how do you know me? And Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, get this, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. See, Nathanael just got Jesus juked in a way so profound that only he knows what it was. But whatever it was huge. The way Jesus juked him is that he slipped in this phrase, I saw you under the fig tree. Now, the significance of what Jesus was saying to Nathanael when he says, I saw you under the fig tree, all throughout the history of Christianity, nobody knows what Jesus meant by that. But Nathanael did. And it was something so astounding, something so astonishing, that it caused Nathanael to go from disregarding Jesus because he's a Nazarene to declaring right away that Jesus was the Son of God and that he was the King of Israel. In other words, he's saying, Philip is right. You're the Messiah. You're the one the entire Bible has been talking about. And Jesus agrees with his new belief. Notice what Jesus says. Jesus said, you believe, and it's a good thing, because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. And then the next verse says, then he added, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven. Now here's our verse, right? He's going back to Genesis 28 and the vision that Jacob has, and he's applying it to himself. He says, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending, not on the stairway that Jacob saw, but on the Son of Man. See, catch what Jesus actually said. I don't know what you would think if a person said this to you, but Jesus said, you know that story in the first book of the Bible where our ancestor Jacob had a vision that God gave him of angels descending and ascending on a stairway? Yeah, that was me. I'm the Son of Man that it was written about. I'm the stairway. I'm the one who's going to open the gates of heaven itself and bring heaven back to earth. It's all on me as the Son of Man and the Son of God. You're right, I am the Son of God. Now, back at that story in Genesis 28, when God says to Jacob, through whom that all peoples on earth will be blessed through your offspring, the next thing he says is in verse 15. He says, God says to Jacob, we're going back to Genesis 28, God says to Jacob, I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now, notice the next verse. It says, when Jacob awoke from his sleep. Now, I think that has a double entendre. I think it's kind of cleverly written because Jacob awoke from his sleep. Literally, he woke up, but he also awoke from his spiritual sleep. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid, it says. He was afraid and said, how awesome. So he wasn't afraid in the sense of Adam and Eve hiding from God because of their sin. Jacob was filled with a sense of awe, a sense of wonder. He was afraid in the awe sense. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is none other than the gate of heaven. See, this response of fear in the awe sense, this response of transcendent wonder, this response of fear and awe, the vivid realization that God had been standing by him the whole time and he was completely unaware of it. To be aware of the presence of God, to be aware of God's reality and his presence is when you sense the reality of God, the presence of God, the love of God, the power of God, the presence of God and the sense of the glory of God, they become more vivid to you in your faith. They become more vivid to you in maybe what the New Testament calls the eyes of your heart, your spiritual imagination, we might say. A vision that you envision in your mind, God's glory, God's power, God's surrounding love, God's presence. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever had a Jacob moment where God's love and his glory and his power and his presence have become more vivid to your sense of vision, your sense of presence? I had a friend named Scott Sauls on Instagram recently. He put this on Instagram and said, "Why look down when the view looking up is like this?" Now, when I saw that, I thought, that's a great picture of what it means to see life vertically instead of horizontally, to see life with this sense of wonder and transcendence, that the road before us is that, but it's overwhelmingly the present by God, by the transcendence of the sky. And I think that certainly is something we've talked about a lot here, of seeing life with the transcendent in view, seeing life with the reality of God. But I think that most of the time we go through our day and we go through our life kind of mostly seeing horizontally. I think like this, where we kind of just see what's ahead of us. We see what's before us. We for sure see a little bit. We believe in God. And we have a sense that, every now and then we think of God. We might pray in times of danger. But for the most part, we just see life horizontally. And our focus is just sort of on what's in front of us and the circumstances around us. And our life is missing a sense of transcendence and wonder and awe at the reality of God's presence in our every moment. Jacob awoke in his faith and became aware of something that had always been true, that God had always been standing beside him. He had always been present, he said, and he was completely unaware. And we can have the same Jacob moment with the eyes of our own faith. We can start looking up to get a better vision of every moment of our life with a vivid sense of God's presence, a vivid sense of God's love, a vivid sense of God's glory, of God's power, of God's reality in our lives. We can learn to start seeing vertically and not just be trapped thinking and seeing horizontally. Being aware of God's presence surrounding and defining every moment in our life. Now, for most of you, not all, for most of you, you don't need more evidence that God exists. You already believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and that should settle it for you. You just instead need to wake up to the vision of what you already believe. To envision the reality of what you believe, or to put it another way, you need to believe what you already know God has said to you in his word. See, Jacob was left at this point in his life with nothing, and yet his life all of a sudden was filled with a sense of awe and wonder because he all of a sudden realized what had already been true. Have you had a Jacob moment? Maybe in your life that's happening. Maybe you're on the edge of a collapse mentally or emotionally or financially. And you need to have a Jacob moment where you become aware of what's always been true, that God says to you what he said to Jacob, that he is infinitely, because God is infinite, he is no less anywhere else, and yet he can be 100% present with you, 100% focused on you, that God can be with you and watching over you, even in these moments like with Jacob where everything's been taken away and he has nothing but a stone for a pillow. Maybe you're going through a time in your life where you're ill and you're not sure what your future is, but it's hard. Maybe you're going through a sense of being alone, especially in this pandemic. There's been isolation. You can't do things with people, and you're even wondering if you have any friends. Maybe you're going through a time where you're being abandoned by a wife or a husband or children. Maybe you're going through a time where you've lost your job, or you fear losing your job. You're on furlough, or you're taking a serious salary cut, and you're filled with anxiety about it. Maybe you're going through a time where you're discouraged and fearful of the recent racial events and what that's going to mean for our country and our race relationships. you need to hear what God is speaking to you. He's been saying it all along, but you've just maybe been unaware. What he said to Jacob, I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you into this renewed land. I will never leave you. I will fulfill what I have promised you. Maybe you need to practice that in your own prayer life, where you begin to say to God, God, you are with me. You always watch over me in every moment. I am surrounded right now by your glory. I am surrounded by your love. I am surrounded by your power. You are always with me, and you have big, forever plans for my life, and I can trust you. That's what Jesus was trying to do the night before he was crucified. The night before he was crucified, Jesus took the Passover meal. And he took the bread at that meal and he said, it's always been about me. The whole Old Testament has always been about me. Passover has always been about me. This is my body given for you. He took the wine and he said, this is my blood of the covenant. This covenant of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. This is the blood of my covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I'm the bridge. I'm the stairway. I'm the Son of God. I'm the Son of Man. Through me, heaven will come back to earth. Through me, you will have a restored body and a forever future, because I have forever big plans for you, and you can trust me. Drink this, he says. Eat this in remembrance of me. This is a Jacob moment, where all of a sudden Jesus gives you something substantive to take and to eat and to realize God has always been standing by you in Christ, by his Holy Spirit, and he has big plans for you, and he will always be with you. He is always with you. He always watches over you, and he will be faithful to his promise. Now, if you don't want to take communion today because this is kind of weird, or you don't have the cracker or bread or wine or grape juice, that's no problem, no worries. Just think through maybe at this moment what God may be telling you. But if you do want to take communion, do so with a Jacob moment. You're trusting in Jesus as the Son of God and Son of Man. And so if you're with a group, maybe you're with a group of people or somebody else, designate one person to take communion with me, and then that person would afterwards serve the others. So if you're by yourself, or if you're the person designated to serve the others, would you take a piece of bread now and dip it in the juice or wine? This is the body and blood of Christ given for you. Eat in faith.
What can wash away our sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make us whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Hand in hand, nothing but the
hear this blessing this morning. May God sanctify us so that we can love Him and love others. Amen. Thanks so much for worshiping with us this morning. Let's take a moment before you leave and watch these short announcements for ways that you can get connected and continue to grow in your faith.
Good morning, I'm Julie, and I want to share with you 3 events that we have coming up. All 3 of these events are Zoom meetings. For some of you, you hear the word Zoom and you get really excited because that means you get to stay at home and wear whatever you want. For others, you're disappointed. You'd rather meet in person. And if that's you, I encourage you to sign up with a friend, invite them over and watch together. Or maybe you can get a group of neighbors together in your backyard and hang out and discuss afterwards. The first announcement is that on Saturday, June the 13th, from 9 to 11, our pastors Nathan Tiemeyer and Shay Roush are going to sit down and chat with Mizzou's new football coach, Elijah Drinkwitz. He's not shy about talking about his faith and sharing how following Christ has changed his life, his family, and his career. You'll also have a chance to ask him questions. The easiest way to sign up is to text MIZ to 55678, or you can also sign up online under events. Next, our women's ministry is going to host a summer mini conference on friendship. It's going to be on June the 27th from 9 to 11. Elizabeth McKinney and Emily Pilkington will be talking about the contrast between our God-designed need for real relationships and the world around us that's trending towards screens replacing physical presence. It's increasingly challenging to find our place and to sustain meaningful connections with others. This is going to be a morning of worship, reflection, and small group discussion. You can sign up online under events. Finally, if you're 55 and older and you're feeling disconnected from the church, our Boomers class is going to continue meeting this summer from home. Shay Roush is going to lead you through a video series by Matt Chandler on the book of James. If this is something you're interested in doing on Sunday mornings at 9:30, email chris@missouri.edu and she'll send you the Zoom link. Whether you're a fan of Zoom or not, one thing we can all agree on is it's pretty neat that you can tune into these meetings from anywhere. So even if you're traveling this summer, you don't have to miss out. I encourage you to sign up for one of these events and stay connected. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Have a great week.